I am Kate Ronald, 26 old. The night my dreams died, the air in our living room felt colder than winter. My parents sat on the couch side by side, their faces hard with the kind of disappointment that feels heavier than any insult. My father's voice broke the silence first. "You're not going to that audition, Kate," he said flatly. "You need to grow up and find a real job." The paper I was holding, my acceptance letter to the National Theatre Conservatory, trembled between my fingers. I had worked for this moment for years. Early mornings, late rehearsals, skipping weekends with friends to practice scripts until my voice gave out. Yet here I was, standing in front of the two people who were supposed to believe in me more than anyone else, being told to let it all go. "Dad." "I got in," I whispered. "It's a full scholarship. He cut me off. "A waste of time." Mom didn't say a word. She just stared at the floor, like agreeing silently was easier than choosing me. That silence burned worse than anything my father said. I still remember the sharp sound of the paper tearing, his hand grabbing the letter from mine, ripping it in half before tossing it into the trash. It fluttered down like snow, each piece taking a piece of my soul with it. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I stood there, numb, humiliated, furious. My throat burned with words I couldn't say. I wanted to scream, to make them see me, to make them proud of me for once. But they just turned back to the TV, like my dreams had been a small inconvenience interrupting their evening news. When I finally made it to my room, I locked the door and let the tears come. My walls were covered with playbills, audition notes, and photos from the small-town theater group I'd joined at 16. I had built my identity around the stage, the one place where I wasn't invisible. My parents never came to a single performance. They said theater was for people who don't know how to make a living. Growing up, I had always been the odd one out in my family. My brother, Michael, was the golden child. Straight A's, engineering degree, stable job in the city. My parents bragged about him to everyone. Michael just got promoted again. Michael's company gave him a car. Michael's boss says he's brilliant. When it came to me, the artist's daughter, they'd just smile awkwardly and say, "Kate's still trying to figure things out." But I had figured things out. Acting wasn't a phase. It was my pulse, my breath, the one place I felt alive. That night, I pressed my palms to the wall where I had pinned my vision board. Quotes from my favorite actors, photos of stages I dreamed of performing on. I whispered to myself, "They can't take this from me." Yet deep down, it already felt like they had. The next morning, my father acted like nothing had happened. He left early for work, leaving behind a note on the kitchen counter. "Stop chasing nonsense. Apply for a proper job. Your mother and I can't keep supporting this." The words "supporting this" hit me like a slap. They had never supported it. Every costume, every acting class, every train ride to a small audition. I had paid for those myself, working part-time at the local cafe since I was 17. They didn't even know how hard I had been saving for that audition trip to New York. I wanted to confront them that morning, to demand respect. But as I saw Mom quietly washing dishes, her eyes red like she hadn't slept either, my anger melted into something more painful. Pity. She caught me staring and said softly, "Your father just wants what's best for you." I shook my head. "What's best for me or for his reputation?" Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. She never did. That day I went to work like nothing happened. My apron smelled like burnt coffee and cinnamon muffins. My hands stiff from washing dishes. My coworkers talked about weekend plans and boyfriends while I faked smiles. But inside I was hollow. Every sound, the cash register ding, the doorbell chime, reminded me of the applause I might never hear again. A few customers complimented my smile. If only they knew it was painted on with exhaustion and heartbreak. When my shift ended, I walked to the park across the street, clutching the tiny notebook I always carried, my script book. It held the lines I'd written for roles that didn't exist yet. I sat on a cold bench and flipped to the first page. In messy ink I had scribbled, "One day, they'll see me on stage, and they'll realize they were wrong." That promise was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. I thought about Michael then, how he'd once told me, "You'll never make it in that world, Kate. People like you don't get lucky." He said it with that smug smile, the one he learned from Dad. And maybe he was right. Maybe people like me, small-town girls with big dreams and no support, weren't meant to make it. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the park in orange light, I felt something inside me shift. I wasn't ready to let their disbelief define me. That night, I dug the torn pieces of my acceptance letter out of the trash. I spread them across my bed, taped them back together as best I could. The creases cut through the words like scars, but it still read, "We are delighted to inform you." And for the first time that day, I smiled through my tears. They could rip the paper, but they couldn't rip the dream. As I lay in the dark that night, I whispered into the silence, "You'll regret this one day. When I make it, you'll see." I didn't know then how long it would take, or that one day, the same parents who tore apart my dreams would come crawling back. Not for forgiveness, but for survival. But that's a story for later. That night, all I knew was pain, and the faint spark of defiance burning quietly in its ashes. After that night, something inside me cracked, but I didn't let it break me. I learned to live around the wound. I stopped bringing up acting, stopped talking about auditions or scripts or anything that made my parents roll their eyes. Instead, I smiled when they asked about job applications, nodding like a good daughter who'd finally come to her senses. It was easier that way, easier to keep the peace, to pretend I didn't ache every time a commercial played on TV and I imagined myself in it. My father would change the channel whenever a movie trailer came on, muttering, "Garbage business, full of failures." He didn't have to say it, but I knew he meant me. I took a job as a receptionist at a hardware store. Not because I wanted to, but because it was respectable. Dad bragged about it to neighbors. "Kate's finally working," he'd say, pride swelling in his chest like he'd fixed something broken. Meanwhile, I sat behind that counter every day, answering phones and pretending my soul wasn't dying one polite smile at a time. Michael visited sometimes, always dressed in crisp shirts and expensive watches. He'd glance around the store and smirk. "Didn't think I'd see you here, sis. Guess reality hit, huh?" I'd laugh it off. That's what you do when you're used to being dismissed. You turn pain into performance. I told myself I was acting even in those moments, pretending to be someone who didn't care. But the truth was, I cared. Every condescending glance, every sigh from my father when I mentioned something creative, every time Mom said, "Just let it go, Kate. Life's easier when you don't fight it." It all piled up like stones on my chest. Years passed that way. The small town I grew up in was safe but suffocating. Everyone knew everyone, and gossip traveled faster than wind. People remembered me as the girl who wanted to be an actress. They'd ask about my career like it was a joke. "Still chasing Hollywood, Kate?" They'd laugh. I'd smile and say, "Just taking a break." But inside, each laugh was a reminder of how small my world had become. At night, I'd scroll through social media and see old theater friends living their dreams, performing in plays, posting backstage photos, traveling to cities I'd only seen in movies. I envied them, but more than that, I hated myself for giving up. Then came the dinner that changed everything. It was Michael's engagement party. My parents hosted it in the backyard, decorated with fairy lights and rented chairs. Everyone was there, family, neighbors, co-workers, all buzzing with admiration for the perfect son. Michael introduced his fiancée, a tall, graceful woman named Jessica, who worked in marketing. She had that polished confidence that made my mother beam. During dinner, Michael raised a glass. "To family," he said, looking directly at me. "Especially my sister Kate, who taught me that chasing impossible dreams isn't for everyone." The table erupted in laughter. Even Dad chuckled. Mom looked uncomfortable, but she didn't defend me. She never did. I sat there, smiling like a porcelain doll, gripping my fork so tightly my knuckles turned white. When the laughter died down, I whispered, "Congratulations, Michael." He grinned. Thanks, sis. Maybe you can help with the event planning. You've got time, right? That was the moment something shifted, not like a snap, but like a slow tear. Quiet disrespect, the years of it had built up, and that night I realized they didn't just underestimate me. They enjoyed it. After dinner, I went to the bathroom and locked the door. I looked in the mirror, at the woman I'd become. Dull eyes, tired face, dreams buried under good behavior. I didn't recognize her. For a long time, I just stared. Then, almost without thinking, I whispered to my reflection, "This isn't me." That night, when the guests left, I sat on the porch steps alone. The lights flickered softly, the air smelled like smoke from the barbecue. I thought about the letter I'd taped together years ago, the one they'd ripped apart. I still had it, folded inside an old notebook in my drawer. I thought about how I'd let their voices become louder than my own. And for the first time in years, I felt anger, not the sharp kind that fades fast, but the deep, simmering kind that builds power. The next morning, I did something reckless. I called the National Theater Conservatory. I didn't expect anyone to remember me, but a woman named Marianne answered. When I told her my name, she paused. "Kate Ronald. Yes, I remember. You turned down our offer a few years ago, right?" My throat tightened. I didn't turn it down. My parents, I stopped myself. I couldn't accept it then. "I was wondering if you ever allow late applicants?" She sighed. "The next auditions are in 6 months. It's competitive, but if you're serious, apply again. 6 months. That was all I needed. When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't in years. Hope mixed with determination. The kind that keeps you awake at night, mapping out possibilities. But old habits die hard. That evening at dinner, I tried to tell my parents. "I'm thinking of auditioning again," I said carefully, watching their faces. Dad's fork froze midair. "For what?" "The conservatory," I said. "They have another round in 6 months." He set his fork down, his jaw tightening. "Kate, enough. You're too old for this nonsense." "I'm 26, I said quietly. "Exactly," he snapped. "When are you going to stop embarrassing yourself? Acting isn't a future." Mom chimed in softly. "Your father's right. It's time to think about stability, sweetheart." Something inside me hardened. "You mean like stability that makes me miserable?" Dad's face darkened. "Don't start again. We've given you everything." I laughed bitterly. "No, Dad. You've given me limits." The silence that followed was suffocating. Michael wasn't there to interrupt this time. It was just the three of us, sitting in the ruins of what should have been love. I stood up, trembling but firm. "I'm not asking for permission. I'm telling you what I'm going to do," he scoffed. "And how will you pay for it? We're not wasting another dime on your foolishness." "I don't need your money," I said. "I'll figure it out." And I meant it. That night, lying awake, I realized something important. Disrespect doesn't always come in the form of shouting or violence. Sometimes it comes quietly, wrapped in concern, disguised as love. My parents' disapproval had shaped me into someone small, but that was over now. I decided I'd save every penny from my job, maybe take on an extra shift or two. 6 months to prove that I could still fight for what I loved. 6 months to reclaim the version of myself they'd tried to bury. The years of quiet disrespect were finally over. I was done being their disappointment. And even though they didn't know it yet, this time, the story would end on my terms. The morning after that argument, I woke up with a strange sense of calm, the kind that comes after a storm when everything inside you has been stripped bare. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, letting the quiet settle around me. It wasn't peace exactly. It was the silence of someone who's finally decided to stop begging to be understood. I dressed quickly, packed my lunch, and left before my parents woke up. The air outside was cool, carrying that faint smell of rain-soaked asphalt. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running away. I was running toward something. At work, I asked my boss for more hours. He was a gruff but kind man named Henry, who owned the hardware store and had known me since I was a kid. "More hours?" he asked, raising a brow. "You trying to save up for something big?" I hesitated, then smiled. "You could say that," he chuckled. "All right, I'll see what I can do. But don't burn yourself out, kid. I wanted to tell him it was already too late for that. From that day on, I worked double shifts. I took any task no one else wanted. Inventory, stock runs, even cleaning the grimy storage room. My body ached, but my resolve hardened. Every dollar I saved went into a small envelope I kept hidden under my mattress. My parents didn't know. They thought I had finally surrendered to their version of normal, and that illusion kept the peace. But cracks began to form. One evening, I came home late, exhausted and covered in dust. Mom was waiting in the kitchen, her arms crossed. "Your father's worried," she said. "You're barely home anymore." I dropped my bag by the door. "I'm working extra hours." "You should be happy," she sighed. "It's not just that, Kate. He thinks you're distracted again." "Distracted," I repeated. "You mean hopeful?" Her expression faltered. "Don't start this again." "I'm not starting anything," I said quietly. "I'm finishing what I never got to." She looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. That was always her way. Half love, half fear. The days blurred together after that. Work, home, sleep, repeat. But one evening, while closing up the store, Henry found me staring blankly at the register. "You look like a ghost," he said. "What's going on, Kate?" I swallowed hard. "Do you ever feel like you owe it to yourself to try one more time, even when everyone tells you it's too late?" He studied me for a long moment before replying. "I lost my wife 5 years ago," he said. "People told me to move on, to sell this place, start over somewhere new. But this store is where we met, where we built our life. So I stayed. Not because it's easy, but because quitting would have meant letting her go completely." I blinked back tears. "So you stayed for her memory?" He nodded. "And maybe a little for myself." His words stuck with me all night. Maybe I wasn't foolish for holding on to my dream. Maybe letting go of it completely would have meant losing me. The real breaking point came 2 weeks later. I had been saving for months by then, skipping lunches, walking to work to avoid bus fare, selling old clothes online. I was close to my goal, just a few hundred short. I kept the envelope locked in a small wooden box under my bed. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Proof that I still had control over something in my life. Then one evening, I came home early. I heard my parents talking in the living room, their voices low but urgent. "She's been hiding money," my father said. I found an envelope under her mattress. My heart dropped. Mom's voice trembled. "Maybe it's for bills," he interrupted sharply. "Don't defend her. She's probably planning something stupid again." I stepped into the room, my voice cold. "It's not stupid. It's for my audition trip." Dad's head snapped toward me. "You lied to us." "No," I said, clutching the doorframe. "I just stopped asking for permission." His face reddened. "You're wasting your life on this childish fantasy." "It's not a fantasy," I shot back. "It's my dream." Mom reached for my arm. "Kate, please," but I pulled away. "You don't get to ask me to stay small just because it makes you comfortable." My father's hand slammed against the table, rattling the glasses. "You're under our roof. As long as that's the case, you'll follow our rules." I met his glare without flinching. "Then maybe I shouldn't live under your roof anymore." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. My mother gasped softly, but my father only sneered. "Fine, go ahead. See how far you get without us." I walked to my room, grabbed my duffel bag, and stuffed what little I had into it. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. As I zipped the bag shut, I noticed the torn acceptance letter still taped inside my notebook. I slipped it in carefully, a reminder of what I was fighting for. When I walked out, Mom stood by the door, tears in her eyes. "Kate, don't do this. You'll regret it." I shook my head. "No, Mom, I'll regret staying." Then I left. I didn't have a plan, just a bus ticket, and a friend's spare couch in the city 2 hours away. The night bus rumbled through dark roads, headlights slicing through the rain. I pressed my forehead to the window and watched my reflection blur. For the first time in years, I felt free, terrified, but free. When I arrived in the city, the noise was overwhelming. Honking cars, flashing lights, people rushing everywhere. It was nothing like home, and yet it felt more like belonging than anything I'd known. My friend Lena, a costume designer I'd met during my community theater days, greeted me at the station. "Kate," she cried, hugging me tight. "I can't believe you actually did it." I laughed through exhaustion. Me neither. She led me to her small apartment, cluttered but cozy, walls covered with sketches and fabric swatches. "You can stay here as long as you need," she said. That night, lying on her couch, I replayed everything in my head. The shouting, the threats, the slammed door. It hurt, but beneath that pain was something new, pride. I had finally chosen myself. I didn't know how I'd afford the rest of my expenses, or even if I'd make it through the audition, but for the first time, I wasn't living for their approval. As I drifted to sleep, I whispered the same words I had as a girl. One day they'll see me on stage. Only this time, it wasn't a wish. It was a promise, carved out of heartbreak, forged in defiance. That night marked the true breaking point, the death of their control and the birth of my freedom. City life had always looked dazzling from afar. Neon lights, crowded theaters, people chasing dreams that actually came true. But when I arrived, reality was smaller, grittier, and far lonelier than I had imagined. Lena's apartment was barely the size of my old bedroom. Her couch sagged in the middle, and every time the upstairs neighbor walked, dust drifted down from the ceiling. Still, it was freedom, and I told myself freedom was worth the discomfort. The first few mornings, I woke before dawn to the hum of traffic outside. I'd lie there for a moment, letting sunlight bleed through the blinds, trying to believe I belonged here. Then I'd get up, make cheap instant coffee, and check online listings for part-time work. I needed rent money and audition money, fast. By the end of the week, I'd landed 2 jobs. Mornings at a cafe, evenings handing out flyers for a small theater downtown. The pay was awful, the hours brutal, but when I stood on a street corner and glimpsed the posters on that theater's glass doors, I felt closer to my dream than I had in years. Lena noticed the exhaustion in my face. "You can't keep this up," she said one night, pinning sequins to a costume under dim light. "I have to," I murmured. "The audition's in 4 months. I need enough to pay the fee," she sighed. "You remind me of me when I first came here, too stubborn to breathe." I smiled weakly. Breathing's overrated when you're chasing something that matters. Still, the grind wore me down. My feet blistered from long shifts. My throat burned from endless coffee steam. Sometimes I'd skip dinner just to stretch the groceries another day, and in the quiet hours, when Lena was asleep, I'd sit by the window watching city lights blink like faraway stars, wondering if anyone down there ever felt as invisible as I did. 2 weeks in, I got my first real chance. The small theater where I worked was holding open auditions for a background role in their upcoming play. It wasn't much, just a 2-line part. But to me it was oxygen. When I told Lena, she squealed. "That's amazing. You have to go for it." I nodded, heart pounding. "I will." On the day of the audition, I wore my best thrift store blouse and a pair of black slacks that didn't quite fit. The stage smelled like sawdust and old curtains. I waited with a dozen others, most of them younger, more confident, more polished. When my name was called, I stepped under the lights and took a deep breath. The director, a sharp-eyed woman named Rita, leaned forward in her chair. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Ronald." I began the lines I'd rehearsed all night. My voice trembled at first, then steadied. For a brief moment, I wasn't Kate the runaway daughter or Kate the broke waitress. I was the character. Alive, defiant, whole. When it ended, Rita gave a short nod. "Thank you. We'll be in touch." It wasn't praise, but it wasn't rejection either. I left the theater floating, clutching that sliver of hope like gold. Days passed. No call, no email. By the 3rd week, I accepted that they'd chosen someone else. Still, something inside me had awakened, the spark that my parents had tried to extinguish. Then the universe decided to test me again. One Friday night, after my cafe shift, I came home to find Lena sitting on the couch frowning. "Rent's due next week," she said softly, "and I just lost one of my clients. I'm sorry, but I'll need your share on time." I felt my stomach twist. I'm still short, I admitted. Give me 2 more weeks? She hesitated. I wish I could, Kate, but my landlord's strict. I nodded, pretending I understood. It's fine. I'll figure it out. That night, I walked the city for hours. The streets shimmered with rain, neon signs reflecting off puddles like fractured dreams. I passed a theater showing a major production, actors smiling from glossy posters, and wondered if any of them had once been as desperate as me. Back at the apartment, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Even the strongest roots bend before they break." I didn't know what it meant yet, but the words made me feel less alone. The next day, I picked up a 3rd job cleaning offices after midnight. It paid barely enough, but it was cash, and I needed it. Sleep became a luxury. My body ached, my mind blurred, and sometimes I caught myself forgetting simple words mid-conversation. Lena worried. "Kate, you're going to collapse." "Then I'll collapse standing," I joked, though the laugh sounded hollow. 3 weeks later, it happened. I was serving coffee during a morning rush when my vision tunneled. The world dimmed. My knees buckled, and the last thing I heard was someone shouting, "Call an ambulance." When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The fluorescent light stabbed my eyes. A nurse leaned over me. "You fainted," she said. "Severe exhaustion and dehydration." Lena arrived soon after, tears in her eyes. "You scared me half to death!" "I'm fine," I croaked. "No, you're not," she said. "You need rest." But rest meant time, and time meant money, and money meant survival. The doctor discharged me after a night, warning me to slow down. Of course I didn't. I couldn't afford to. I went back to work 2 days later, weaker but determined. That week, I got a message from home. It was Mom. "Mom, we heard from the neighbors that you left your job. Are you doing okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "Me. I'm fine." A minute later. "Mom, your father says you can come back if things get tough. We'll help you get settled, maybe take some courses, something practical." I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on one. "Me. Tell him thank you. But I'm not coming back." No reply came after that. For days, I replayed her words, "if things get tough," as if they weren't already unbearable, but I refused to crawl back. Pride can be dangerous, but it was all I had left. By now, my savings envelope was thin again. I'd spent most of it on rent and hospital bills. The audition date was creeping closer, and I still didn't have enough for the fee. One night, as I stared at the city from the rooftop of Lena's building, she joined me. "You're scaring me, Kate," she said quietly. "You can't keep bleeding for people who never believed in you." I looked at her. "I'm not bleeding for them anymore. I'm bleeding for me," she smiled sadly. "Then promise me something. When you make it, remember this part. Remember how strong you had to be." "I will," I whispered. "Every sleepless night, every tear. I'll remember." As the wind whipped my hair, I thought about how far I'd come since that night in my parents' living room. I had nothing now, no stability, no safety net. But I also had no chains. Falling alone was terrifying, but I realized something in that moment. Sometimes, falling is the only way to learn how to fly. And I wasn't done yet, not even close. The city below buzzed with possibility. Somewhere out there, a door was waiting to open. And when it did, I'd be ready. There's a moment right before dawn, when the world holds its breath. A quiet pause between the darkness you've survived and the light you're not sure you deserve. That's what those months felt like. I existed in that in-between, too proud to go home, too broke to quit. Every morning started the same. The hiss of the espresso machine, the hum of traffic outside, the sting in my fingers as I counted crumpled bills into the register. I smiled at customers who didn't look at me, refilled cups I couldn't afford to drink from, and told myself it was temporary. But one evening, the spark I'd been begging for finally flickered to life. It began with a voice. "Hey, are you Kate Ronald?" I turned from wiping tables to see a woman in her 40s, with silver streaks in her hair and eyes sharp enough to see through lies. She wore a worn leather jacket and carried a script binder under her arm. "Yes," I said cautiously, Do I know you? She smiled. You auditioned for the Glass Orchard a while back. I'm Rita. My heart skipped. The director from that tiny theater. You remember me? Hard to forget the girl who bled emotion all over my stage, she said. One of our actresses dropped out. The role's small, but it's paid. Interested? My throat tightened. Yes, God, yes. Good, she said. Rehearsals start tomorrow. Don't be late. When she left, I just stood there trembling. It wasn't fame or fortune, but it was something. That night I ran home, nearly tripping on the stairs in my excitement. Lena, I shouted. They want me. Rita, the director. She offered me a part. Lena's face lit up. See? I told you the universe owed you a miracle. I laughed, collapsing onto the couch. For the first time in months, joy felt real. Not borrowed, not forced, but mine. Rehearsals were grueling but intoxicating. The theater smelled of dust and dreams. We rehearsed late into the night, the floorboards creaking under our steps. My role was minor, a maid with only a few lines, yet I threw everything I had into it. Rita watched me closely during every scene. You feel before you think, she said once. That's rare. Don't lose it. I clung to those words like armor. Still, balancing everything was chaos. I'd work at the cafe from 6 to 3, nap for an hour, then rush to rehearsals until midnight. Some nights I slept on the dressing room floor. My body screamed for rest, but my heart thrived. Then one evening, after a particularly long rehearsal, Rita pulled me aside. You ever think about auditioning for bigger companies? I hesitated. I did once, got in. My parents. I trailed off. She nodded slowly. And you let them stop you? I swallowed hard. Back then, yes. Not anymore. Good, she said. Because you've got something raw. Don't waste it trying to please people who can't see it. Her words echoed long after I got home. A week before the show opened, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name written in my mother's careful handwriting. My stomach twisted as I tore it open. Inside was a single note. We heard you're doing theater again. Your father says you're making a fool of yourself. Please, Kate, come home before this gets worse. I stared at the paper until the words blurred. Lena found me like that. The letter crumpled in my hand. Parents again? She asked softly. I nodded. They'll never change. Then change for yourself, she said. Don't give them the power to define what's worse. The night of the premiere arrived faster than I expected. I stood backstage in costume, heart pounding, the muffled buzz of the audience filling the air. I peeked through the curtain, rows of strangers, faces glowing under the soft theater lights. When my cue came, I stepped onto the stage. The heat of the spotlight hit me like a heartbeat. For a moment I forgot my lines, not out of fear but awe. I was here. After years of humiliation, tears, and loneliness, I was finally doing what I loved. The play went beautifully. Every scene, every breath felt alive. When it ended, applause thundered through the room, a sound I'd dreamed about since childhood. I bowed, tears stinging my eyes. After the show, Rita found me. You were steady, she said. Next time you'll do more than steady. Keep that fire, I grinned. Thank you, Rita, for everything. Don't thank me, she said. Just promise me you won't stop. I won't. Walking home that night, the city lights looked different. Softer, warmer. For once, they didn't feel like distant stars. They felt like possibilities. But happiness in my life never lasted long. 2 days later, the cafe owner called me into his office. Kate, I'm sorry, Henry said, rubbing his temples. We're cutting staff. Business is slow. I have to let you go. The words hit harder than I expected. But I need this job, I whispered. I know, he said gently. If I could keep you, I would. I nodded, numb. Thank you for giving me a chance. When I left, I sat on the curb outside, my uniform still on, tears streaking my cheeks. For the first time in months, I felt the weight of everything crash down. Rent, bills, food, the audition fee I'd barely scraped together. Lena tried to comfort me that night. You'll find something else. Maybe, I said quietly. But every time I take one step forward, something drags me back. She touched my shoulder. Then drag it with you. That line stuck with me. Drag it with you. So I did. I started selling handmade jewelry online, using old beads and wires I found at thrift stores. I performed in small community showcases, sometimes for no pay, just for exposure. Each performance led to another contact, another whisper of opportunity. One evening, while clearing props after rehearsal, Rita approached again. There's an open call showcase next month. Directors, agents, talent scouts. You should audition. My heart leapt. I can't afford the entry fee. She studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. Consider it covered. You've earned it. I stared at her, stunned. Rita, I can't— Don't argue, she said. You remind me of myself when I still believed dreams could outrun fear. Don't waste that. When she walked away, I sank to the floor and cried, not from sadness, but gratitude. The spark that had nearly died months ago now burned bright again. I promised myself I'd make the most of it. I spent every free minute preparing, refining monologues, recording practice runs, even watching videos of great actresses breaking down scenes. I was relentless. On nights I couldn't sleep, I'd whisper to the ceiling, "They'll see me one day. Even if they never admit it, they'll know." And beneath that whisper, a new truth grew. I wasn't chasing their approval anymore. I was chasing my own reflection, the version of me I'd almost lost. That was the real spark in the darkness. It wasn't luck. It wasn't rescue. It was me, finally believing that my light was worth fighting for. The weeks leading up to the showcase felt like living on a wire. One slip, and I'd crash back into the life I'd escaped. Every day had a rhythm of hunger, hope, and rehearsal. I woke before sunrise to practice monologues. My voice raw from repeating lines to an empty room, my reflection in the mirror my only audience. Lena would watch from her sewing table, shaking her head. You're obsessed. Focused, I corrected. Obsession and focus are twins, she muttered, smiling anyway. She wasn't wrong. The showcase wasn't just another audition. It was proof that everything I'd sacrificed, sleep, family, comfort, meant something. I had to show them, and maybe more importantly, show myself, that I could build a future from the rubble my parents left behind. Rita helped me prepare. Some nights after rehearsal, we'd sit in the empty theater while the stage lights buzzed overhead. Your biggest flaw, she said one night, is that you still apologize when you breathe. Stop doing that. The world takes enough from women like you. Don't hand it more. Her words hit me harder than she knew. I had spent my life apologizing, for wanting too much, for feeling too deeply, for existing outside my parents' narrow lines. That night, I promised myself I'd stop saying sorry for being alive. The showcase was set for mid-April. I had exactly 3 weeks. I poured every ounce of energy into preparation, working part-time shifts wherever I could find them. Temporary catering, grocery bagging, even handing out flyers at subway stations. My hands were blistered, my back ached, but every coin went toward one thing, a simple black dress for the performance. Nothing extravagant, just something that made me look like the woman I was becoming. Strong, grounded, impossible to ignore. Then the phone rang. It was my mother. I froze when I saw her name. I hadn't heard her voice in months. For a long moment I considered ignoring it, but something inside me whispered, "Face it." I answered. "Hello?" "Kate," she said, her tone careful, as if approaching a wild animal. "How are you?" "I'm fine, Mom. We heard— You're still doing theater?" "Yes," a pause. "Your father doesn't understand why. He says you're wasting your degree, your time." "Of course he does," I interrupted. "He never understood anything that didn't come with a paycheck." She sighed. "He just worries. Things aren't easy right now." Something about her voice cracked. "What do you mean?" "Your father's company downsized. He lost his position last month." I said nothing. For years, I'd imagined hearing those words. Not because I wished him harm, but because maybe losing power would teach him empathy. Yet hearing it, I felt no victory. Just silence. Mom continued, "He's trying to find something new, but it's been hard. The house feels different now, quiet. Michael barely calls. Michael, of course. He's busy living his perfect life," I said bitterly. "Kate, please," she whispered. "I just thought you should know." "Thanks," I said flatly, and ended the call. Afterward, I sat staring at the wall. The past was trying to claw its way back, but I couldn't let it. Not now. 2 days later, the dress arrived. Simple black cotton, soft and unassuming. When I tried it on, Lena clapped her hands. "You look like someone who finally stopped apologizing." I laughed. "You sound like Rita." "She's right, though," Lena said. "This version of you? She's dangerous, in the best way." The day of the showcase arrived with heavy rain. My hair frizzed, my shoes soaked, but nothing could shake my focus. I reached the theater early, my script tucked under my arm, and found Rita pacing backstage. "You nervous?" she asked. "I'm alive," I said. She grinned. "Good answer." The showcase drew a small but intimidating audience. Directors, agents, producers, people whose opinions could shift entire lives. My heart thudded as the announcer called my name. Next up, Kate Ronald, performing an original monologue titled "The Room They Built." I stepped onto the stage. The spotlight burned my skin. The murmur of the crowd faded into nothing. For a second, I saw my father's face in the dark, stern, unyielding, watching me fail. I inhaled deeply. Then I began. "My parents built a room for me when I was young," I said, my voice steady. "White walls. Small window. Locked door. They said it was for my safety. I believed them, until I realized I'd grown too tall to fit inside." Each word poured from me like confession and fire. I spoke of love turned control, of being told to shrink, of breaking the door open with my bare hands. By the final line, "Now the room stands empty, but I still hear the echoes of their rules," the audience was silent. Then came applause, slow at first, then building, until it filled every inch of the theater. I bowed, breathless. For the first time, I felt not just seen, but understood. Backstage, Rita hugged me. "That," she whispered, "was the sound of someone reclaiming herself." After the show, an older man approached, his suit immaculate, his handshake firm. "I'm Jackson Harris, casting director for the new stage company," he said. "We're looking for fresh talent for an upcoming production. You were extraordinary. Would you come in for a reading next week?" I could barely breathe. "Yes, absolutely," he smiled. "I'll have my assistant send details." When he left, I turned to Rita, stunned. "Did that just happen?" She chuckled. "Welcome to the beginning." The following week was a blur. The new stage company wasn't some small community theater. It was respected, professional, everything I'd dreamed of. The reading went well. Jackson watched quietly, nodding throughout. "You've got depth," he said afterward. "We'll be in touch." That night, I sat with Lena on the rooftop, the city glittering below us. "Do you realize what you've done?" she asked. "Barely," I admitted. "You built everything they tried to destroy." Her words echoed through me. She was right. My parents had torn apart my letter, my confidence, my peace, and somehow from those pieces, I had built something new. A week later, the email arrived. Subject, offer letter. The winter hour, I'd landed a supporting role in a professional production. Paid, contracted, official. I screamed so loudly that Lena spilled her tea. "Oh my God!" she yelled, laughing. "You did it!" "I did it," I whispered, reading the words again and again. That night, I sat alone by the window, the city lights flickering across my face. For years, I'd begged my parents to see me, to acknowledge my worth. But now I understood. I didn't need their validation. Their rejection had been the hammer that shaped me. Still, a part of me longed to tell them. To say, "See, you were wrong." I opened my phone, typed a message, then stopped. No, not yet. Let them hear it from someone else. I closed my eyes, breathing in the smell of rain and streetlights, and whispered, "I built it, Dad, without you." For once, the darkness didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. The first day I walked into the rehearsal hall for the winter hour, I felt like I'd stepped into another world, one I used to only dream about. The space smelled of fresh paint and ambition. Actors stretched and chatted, stage hands adjusted lights, and the low hum of possibility filled the air. I stood in the corner, clutching my script, trying to hide the trembling in my hands. "Kate Ronald?" a voice called. I turned to see Jackson Harris, the casting director, smiling as he approached. "Glad you're here. You impressed us in your reading." "Thank you," I said, forcing myself to sound calm. He nodded toward the group. "You'll be playing Clara, the protagonist's sister. Small role, but emotionally demanding. I think you'll elevate it." Hearing that, something inside me straightened. The years of shame, of being told I'd never be enough, began to peel away. When rehearsals started, I threw myself into every scene. My co-stars noticed. "You've got fire," said Eli, the lead actor, during a break. "Where'd you train?" I smiled faintly. "In a small town where no one believed I could." He laughed. "Guess you proved them wrong." The words lingered. Prove them wrong. It was the validation I'd been starving for. Not from my parents, but from the world itself. Weeks passed in a blur of rehearsals, late nights, and adrenaline. My character, Clara, was a woman silenced by her family, dismissed until she finally stood her ground. Playing her felt almost cruelly poetic. Every time I delivered a line, I was speaking for both of us. Rita came to one of the previews. When she found me afterward, she smiled proudly. "You look like someone who's exactly where she's supposed to be." "I think I am," I said. Opening night arrived like a storm. The theater pulsed with energy. The audience murmured, waiting. I stood backstage, my palms slick with sweat. I closed my eyes and whispered a quiet promise. This time, no one can take it from me. The play began, and every scene felt electric. When the curtain finally fell, the applause was thunderous. People stood, clapping, cheering. I bowed through tears. The spotlight was no longer frightening. It was home. Afterward, Jackson approached me. "You have something special, Kate. We'd like to extend your contract for the touring version of the play." My breath caught. Touring meant travel, visibility, a career. "Yes," I said, barely holding back tears. "Yes, I'd love that." That night, I called Rita and Lena. We screamed and cried together over the phone. I felt unstoppable. But then, just as my life reached its peak, the past found me again. A week later, I received another call from my mother. Her voice was fragile. "Kate, your father's sick." I froze. "What?" "He had a mild stroke," she said. "He's recovering, but things are difficult. We can't keep up with the bills. Michael's abroad for work." I didn't know who else to call. I sat in silence, my pulse pounding. For years they'd dismissed me, mocked me, treated my dream like a disease, and now they were asking for help. "Mom," I said slowly. "Why me?" "Because you're his daughter," she whispered. I closed my eyes. "You didn't think I was your daughter when he tore up my scholarship letter." Her breath hitched. "Kate, please. I know we made mistakes." Mistakes. That word was too soft for the years of humiliation, the loneliness, the pain. But as she spoke, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was powerful. I held the one thing they'd said I'd never have. Control. "I'll think about it," I said, and hung up. For days, I wrestled with the decision. Part of me wanted to ignore them, let them taste the helplessness they'd fed me all my life. But another part, the softer part, remembered the girl who once begged for their love. When Lena found me staring out the window one night, she asked, "You're thinking about them, aren't you?" I nodded. "They need help, and I don't know if I should give it." She leaned against the counter. "Maybe it's not about them anymore. Maybe it's about who you become when you decide." Her words settled in my chest. 2 days later, I drove back to my hometown for the first time in years. The roads looked smaller, the houses older. When I pulled up to my parents' house, my heart felt strangely calm. Mom opened the door. She looked thinner, grayer. Her eyes filled with tears when she saw me. "Kate." "Hi, Mom." She reached for me, but I didn't hug her. Not yet. Inside, the house felt unfamiliar. Dad sat in a recliner, his face pale, his right hand trembling slightly. He looked up at me, and for the first time there was no arrogance in his eyes. "Just fear, Kate," he said hoarsely. "You came." I stood across from him. "I heard you were unwell." He nodded. "Guess life has a way of humbling us." I wanted to say good, but I didn't. Instead, I studied the man who had once made me feel small. Now he looked small himself. Mom brought tea, her hands shaking. "It's been hard," she said quietly. "The medical bills, the house repairs. I don't know how we'll manage." I sipped the tea, letting the silence stretch. "What happened to Michael?" "He sends money sometimes," she said. "But it's not enough." "So you called the failure?" I said, my tone sharper than I intended. Her eyes filled with tears. "Kate, that's not fair." I set down the cup. "You're right. Fair would have been believing in me when I needed it." Dad cleared his throat. "You've done well for yourself," he said. "I have." "And you're touring now?" "Yes. The girl you said would never make it is performing in front of sold-out crowds." His gaze dropped to his lap. "Maybe I was wrong." "Maybe?" I said softly. "You were wrong," he nodded slowly. "You were always stronger than I wanted to admit. For a moment, the silence between us wasn't bitter. It was heavy with truth." Mom whispered, "Can you forgive us?" I looked at her, really looked. The wrinkles, the weariness, the regret. "Forgiveness isn't what you need," I said. "You need to live with what you did. And I need to live free from it," she sobbed quietly. Dad turned away, his eyes glistening. Before I left, I stood at the doorway and said, "You used to say acting wouldn't feed me. Turns out it's feeding you." I walked out before they could reply. Driving back to the city, I didn't feel joy or guilt, just clarity. I wasn't that broken girl anymore. I'd become everything they said I couldn't be. And now, they were the ones depending on me. When I got home, Lena was waiting. "How did it go?" I smiled faintly. "Let's just say," the tables finally turned. When I left their house that day, I didn't look back. The road shimmered in the heat, the air thick with dust and memory. I'd gone there out of duty, maybe even curiosity, but I came back with something I hadn't expected: closure. Not the kind that comes with forgiveness, but the kind that comes when you finally realize you don't owe anyone an explanation anymore. Back in the city, the Winter Hour tour began. We performed in new towns every week, bright lights, velvet curtains, hotel rooms that never quite felt like home. I poured every piece of myself into each show, and every applause felt like a quiet rebellion against my past. I'd look out at the audience sometimes and wonder if, somewhere out there, my parents were watching clips of me online, hearing my name on local news segments, realizing that the daughter they dismissed had become a name people applauded. But pride has a strange way of curving back on itself. It was during the third week of the tour when I got another call, this time from Michael. "Kate," he said, his voice tense. "You need to talk to Mom. Things are bad." My stomach sank. "What now?" "The bank's taking the house," he said bluntly. "Dad's medical bills piled up and they defaulted on the loan." I froze. "You're kidding." I wish I was. For a moment, the words didn't make sense. That house had been their fortress, the temple of their pride. The carefully mowed lawn, the white picket fence, the polished cars in the driveway. All of it had been proof that they were respectable, responsible, superior. And now it was collapsing. "Can't you help them?" I asked coldly. Michael scoffed. "I'm already sending money every month." "You think I'm made of gold?" I clenched my jaw. "And you called me to do what exactly?" "Because you're the only one they'll listen to now," he said. "They're too ashamed to ask, but Mom's desperate." I laughed bitterly. "They weren't ashamed when they tore up my letter." He sighed. "Look, Kate, I know they weren't perfect, but—" "Not perfect?" I snapped. "They broke me, Michael. And now they want me to fix them?" Silence filled the line. Finally, he said, "Do what you want. But they're losing everything." Then he hung up. For a long time, I sat in the dark hotel room, my phone still in my hand, the hum of the city outside barely audible over the thudding in my chest. I thought about the years I'd spent begging for approval, for love that never came. Now, they were the ones begging, not with words, but through silence and desperation. The next morning, before rehearsal, I called Mom. She answered on the first ring, her voice trembling. "Kate." "I heard about the house," I said flatly. Her breath caught. "It's true. The bank gave us notice. We have 2 weeks to vacate. Where will you go?" "I don't know," she whispered. "Your father, he's not himself anymore. He's so quiet." "Quiet," I repeated. "Funny. That's new. Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm not asking for much. Just help us keep the house a little longer. We'll sell later. I just need time." For a moment, I almost softened. Almost. But then I remembered the years of cold dinners, of being told to give up, of hearing my father laugh when I cried. "Mom," I said slowly, "when I was 19, I asked you to believe in me for just 1 year. Just one. You didn't. Now you're asking me to believe in you for a few weeks. You see the problem?" She started to sob. "Kate, I know. We failed you. But please, if you have any kindness left—" "I do," I said. "That's why I'm not hanging up." "Then help us," she pleaded. I inhaled deeply. "No," her cry was soft, broken. "You don't mean that." "I do," I said. "You taught me to stand on my own. Now you'll have to learn the same lesson." I ended the call before she could answer. That night, I went on stage again. The play was about family, betrayal, redemption, irony at its finest. During one emotional monologue, I looked straight into the spotlight and thought of my parents. I channeled every ounce of pain, of anger, into my performance. When the curtain fell, the audience rose to their feet, and I cried. Not because of the applause, but because I realized I wasn't pretending anymore. The pain I'd carried had become art. A few days later, a journalist interviewed me for a feature about the tour. "You've become quite the success story," she said. "Do your parents come to your shows?" I smiled thinly. "No, they're watching from afar." "Do they support your work now?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. "They're learning to." The article went viral online. The headline read, "From Rejection to Recognition, Kate Ronald's Journey from Family Doubt to National Stage." Within days, old classmates, teachers, and even neighbors from my hometown were commenting, sharing, writing about how they always knew I'd make it. Hypocrisy. I learned ages well. But the most shocking moment came a week later, when I received a message from an unknown number. "Dad, your article made its way around town. Everyone's talking about you. I'm proud, Kate." I stared at the words, my chest tightening. Proud. It was the one word I'd begged for my entire life. And yet, seeing it now, it felt hollow. "Me, thank you. I hope you find peace with what's left." I didn't mean it cruelly, but truth often sounds like cruelty to those who've never faced it. The following week, Mom called again. "They repossessed the house," she said through tears. "We're staying with a friend until we can figure things out." "I'm sorry," I said simply. And I meant it. Not because I wanted to save them, but because I knew what it felt like to lose everything. After the call, I sat by my hotel window and watched the rain blur the city lights. It struck me how full circle life had become. The same parents who once told me art would never sustain me now needed the stability I had built through that very art. Karma wasn't loud. It didn't scream or gloat, it whispered. The next morning, I received a delivery at the theater, a small box with my mother's handwriting on the tag. Inside was a torn photograph, me at 16 performing in a school play. My father had taken that picture. On the back, Mom had written, "We should have believed in you. I hope you can believe we're sorry." I traced the edges of the photo for a long time, then set it gently in my bag. Some wounds don't heal with apologies, but acknowledgement still matters. That night, during the curtain call, I looked out into the crowd and imagined them there. Older, tired, watching quietly as I bowed. Not to seek approval anymore, but to show them that I'd survived their doubt, The mighty had fallen, but I didn't celebrate their fall. I simply understood it. Because pride, like any fortress, always crumbles when it's built on someone else's pain. It was late autumn when they finally showed up. The tour had just wrapped, and I'd returned to the city flat I was renting through the theater company. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, my suitcase still half-packed with costumes. I'd barely taken off my coat when the doorbell rang. At first I thought it was Lena. She had a habit of showing up unannounced with takeout, but when I opened the door, the world tilted. Mom stood there, thinner than I remembered, clutching a worn handbag. Beside her, leaning heavily on a cane, was Dad. "Kate," she said, her voice small. "We didn't know where else to go." For a moment I couldn't speak. Memories flickered like film reels. Him ripping up my letter, her silent compliance, every word that had ever cut me down. And now they were on my doorstep. I stepped aside wordlessly. They entered, moving as if afraid to break something. The living room looked suddenly foreign, as though the past had seeped in with the cold air. Dad sank onto the couch. "Nice place," he murmured. "It's rented," I said flatly. Mom clutched her bag tighter. "We've been staying with a friend, but she can't keep us anymore. We just need a few weeks until we figure things out." I crossed my arms. "You mean until I figure things out for you?" She winced. "That's not what I meant." I looked at my father. "What do you want from me?" He lifted his eyes, clouded with something that almost looked like humility. "A chance," he said, "to make things right." The words felt rehearsed, but the tremor in his hands didn't. For the first time, he looked fragile, human. "Why now?" I asked quietly. "Because the house is gone? Because Michael stopped calling?" He exhaled shakily. "Because we were wrong." The simplicity of it almost angered me. Wrong didn't cover the nights I cried myself to sleep, the jobs I worked to survive, the years of silence. But looking at them, I saw the truth. Life had already punished them far more than I ever could. I motioned toward the spare room. "You can stay. For now." Mom burst into tears. "Thank you, Kate. Don't thank me," I said. "Just don't lie to me again." The next days were awkward, like living with ghosts. Mom tried to tidy the apartment, folding laundry that wasn't hers. Dad sat by the window most afternoons, staring at the traffic below. Sometimes he'd ask about the play, and I'd answer in short sentences. One evening while I was cooking pasta, he said quietly, "I read about you online. The reviews, they said you were brilliant." I didn't turn around. "You used to say acting was for fools," he sighed. "I said a lot of things I shouldn't have. Why?" I asked, finally facing him. Why was it so hard to be proud of me? He stared into his hands. "Because I failed at my own dreams," he said. "And it was easier to crush yours than face mine." The confession knocked the breath out of me. For all the anger I'd carried, I'd never imagined the root of it was fear. Later that night, I heard him coughing in the spare room. Mom was sitting beside him, rubbing his back. I watched quietly from the doorway until she noticed. "He refuses to see a doctor," she whispered. "I'll take him tomorrow," I said. At the clinic, the doctor confirmed what I suspected. Stress and neglect had worsened his condition. Medication and rest were essential. I filled the prescription myself, my hands trembling as I handed over the money. That night, while he slept, Mom sat at the kitchen table. "You didn't have to pay for that," she said softly. "I know." "Then why did you?" I looked at her tired face. "Because I don't want to become what he was." She covered her mouth, sobbing. "We don't deserve you." "Maybe not," I said. "But you're still my parents." Days turned into weeks. Slowly, the ice between us began to melt. We talked about small things, groceries, weather, old neighbors. But every conversation hovered around the past, circling it like a wound too tender to touch. One afternoon, as I left for rehearsal, Mom stopped me. "Your father wants to see your play," she said. I froze. "That's not a good idea." "Please," she whispered. It would mean the world to him. Part of me wanted to refuse, to protect the fragile peace we'd built. But another part, Perhaps the child still longing for recognition. Agreed. Fine, I said. Tomorrow night. But he sits quietly. No drama. The next evening, they arrived at the theater dressed neatly, though their clothes were worn. I saw them from the wings before the show started. Mom clutched her purse like a lifeline. Dad looked overwhelmed, eyes darting around the auditorium. When the lights dimmed and the play began, something shifted inside me. Standing under the spotlight, I wasn't performing for critics or fans. I was performing for them. Every line I spoke felt like reclaiming a piece of history. During the final monologue, when my character said, "You can't silence a voice once it learns its own name," I saw Mom crying in the audience. Even Dad wiped his eyes. After the curtain call, I found them waiting near the stage door. Dad's voice shook. "You were magnificent." I searched his face for mockery, but there was none. Only awe. "Thank you," I said quietly. He reached for my hand. "I'm sorry, Kate, for everything." It wasn't eloquent, but it was real. And for once, that was enough. Mom added through tears, "We'll find our own place soon. You've done more than we deserve. Take your time," I said. "But understand, this isn't a rescue. It's a lesson." Dad nodded. "We understand." A few weeks later, they moved into a modest apartment across town. I helped them carry boxes, though they protested. When we were done, Dad stood in the doorway, breathing hard. "You built a life on the ashes we left," he said. "That's something to be proud of," I smiled faintly. "You finally said it out loud." He chuckled weakly. "Took me long enough." As I left their new place, Mom hugged me tight. "You're stronger than both of us combined," she whispered. Driving home that night, I felt the strangest mix of exhaustion and relief. Revenge hadn't come in the form of shouting or punishment. It came in dignity, in watching them bow to the truth. They had knocked on my door seeking mercy, and I had answered not with hatred, but with strength. Lena called that night. "So?" she asked. "How did it feel having them there?" I looked out the window at the city glowing below. It felt like closing a book I've been reading my whole life. And realizing I finally wrote the last chapter myself. It's strange how silence can feel louder than any applause. Months after my parents moved into their small apartment, I found myself standing on the balcony of my own place, looking out over the city lights that had once terrified me. The skyline flickered with life, cars honking below, laughter drifting from open windows. But inside me there was peace. Not perfect, but earned. My parents and I had fallen into a delicate rhythm. I visited once a week, usually bringing groceries or medicine. We didn't talk about the past much anymore. Some stories were better left folded away. But every time my father smiled at me, shy and quiet, I saw the apology he couldn't always put into words. The theater world moved quickly. The winter hour ended its run, and new scripts found their way into my hands. My career had finally taken root. People recognized me on the street sometimes. "Aren't you that actress from the touring show?" they'd ask. I'd smile, nod, and think, yes, the same girl who was told she'd never make it. One crisp Saturday morning, as I sipped coffee by the window, I got a message from my mother. "Mom, your father wants to see your new show. He says he'll behave this time." I smiled, typing back, "Me. Tell him he'd better not fall asleep this time either." That evening, when I spotted them in the audience again, something shifted. My father wore a simple gray jacket, his hair thinner, but his eyes soft with pride. Mom held his hand the entire show. For 2 hours they watched in silence, and when the lights came up and the applause rose, they were the first to stand. Afterward, backstage, he hugged me, really hugged me, for the first time since I was a child. "You were incredible," he whispered. "I learned from the best," I said with a smirk. "You always told me to be strong," he chuckled weakly. "Not like this." "Exactly like this," I replied. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was something close, a fragile understanding that the past couldn't be erased, only acknowledged. Over time, we rebuilt something resembling family. It wasn't warm and effortless like I'd once dreamed, but it was honest, I helped them find a steady support program, connected them with a local aid foundation. Watching them accept help humbled them, but it also healed something in me. The same pride that once poisoned them now made them grateful. One day, I found Dad sitting on a park bench near my theater, feeding pigeons. "You look peaceful," I said, sitting beside him. He nodded. "I've been thinking about you, about that letter I tore up." I looked at him quietly. He sighed. "I thought I was protecting you from disappointment. Turns out I was protecting myself from feeling small. You were brave in ways I never was." His voice cracked, and for a moment, he was no longer my father. He was just a man haunted by regret. "It's over now," I said gently. He smiled faintly. "Not for me, but thank you for giving me the chance to try." When I walked away that day, I realized that revenge doesn't always end with triumph. Sometimes it ends with truth. Watching him admit his weakness was more powerful than any revenge I could have imagined. Weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, shaky. It was from him. "Kate, if you're reading this, I probably didn't get to say everything I wanted. You were right to fight for yourself. I used to think strength meant control, but I see now, strength is love that doesn't depend on approval. You taught me that. Love, Dad." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my journal. 2 days later, I got the call from Mom. He had passed away quietly in his sleep. That night, I performed anyway. It wasn't out of denial or coldness, but because I knew he would have wanted it. On stage, under the warm spotlight, I delivered every line with the steadiness of someone who had finally made peace with her ghosts. The applause that night wasn't just for my character. It was for the woman I'd become. After the show, I stood on the empty stage long after everyone had left. I whispered into the silence, "You see me now, Dad." And I swear for a second, I felt something in the air, light, forgiving, free. The following weeks blurred together. Mom started volunteering at a local community theater, helping sew costumes. "I thought it might bring me closer to you," she said shyly. I laughed and hugged her. "It already does." Our relationship changed, softer now, grounded in mutual respect. She stopped calling me her dreamer and started calling me her fighter. As for me, I began mentoring young actors, the ones who came from small towns, broken families, the ones told they'd never make it. I saw pieces of my old self in them, scared, hopeful, desperate for someone to say you can. And when I looked at them, I did. I told them what I wish someone had told me. You don't need permission to be who you are. Because if I'd waited for my parents' approval, I'd still be that girl behind a hardware store counter, pretending not to hurt. Now when I walk past posters with my face on them, I don't think about fame or revenge. I think about survival, how I turned pain into purpose. A few months later, Mom came to another show, this time bringing flowers. She stood waiting backstage, eyes bright with pride. "Your father would have loved this one," she said. I smiled softly. "Maybe he was watching." She nodded. "He was. I could feel it." We stood there for a long moment, two women bound by both pain and redemption. She whispered, "I wish I had believed in you sooner." I took her hands gently. "You believe in me now. That's enough." That night, as I drove home through the city, I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing anything. I had arrived, not at fame or fortune, but at peace. And I realized something. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what they did. It means refusing to let it define who I become. They tore my dream once. I rebuilt it stronger. They broke my heart once. I filled it with purpose. They doubted me once. I believed enough for all of us. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, forgiveness isn't for them. It's the final gift you give yourself.